This video is sponsored by Keeps. An impressive coastal fortification has lain in Manila Bay between the islands of Corregidor and Carabao in the Philippines since the early 20th century. Erected in a small ship-shaped island as part of the little-known conflict between the United States and Spain, it became known as the most significant coastal fort ever built, with concrete walls up to 36 feet thick and impressive armament. During the invasion of the Philippines shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the fort would hold the Japanese advance much longer than expected. For months on end, Fort Drum fiercely defended the Manila Bay surroundings and the Allied interests. However, the archipelago was irremediably lost, in part due to outdated construction contrivances that were never upgraded and required extenuating human work. 3 years later, as the war was coming to its end, the Americans decided to recapture the fort, but just as the Japanese had learned when facing the structure before, they soon found out just how impenetrable the fortification of their own making was. Still, the invulnerable fortress would prove no match for the brave engineers and soldiers in the 151st Infantry Regiment and a genius plan devised by one very clever officer, giving way to what would be forever known as Drum D-Day. With 2 in 3 men experiencing some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35, hair loss can really sneak up on you. The best way to prevent hair loss is to do something about it while you still have hair left, and Keeps is here to help. Keeps is an online subscription service that offers clinically proven, doctor-recommended treatments to help men keep their hair. You'll be connected directly with a physician who will help you find the right treatment and products for your specific hair goals and conditions. Each treatment plan comes with an entire year of unlimited messaging with your prescribing physician to answer all your questions, and you'll have 24/7 access to a network of medical advisors, prescribers, and specialists to get answers and feedback in real time. As YouTubers who work from home, we appreciate that the entire process can be completed from the comfort of your own home without any awkward visits to a doctor's office or pharmacy. Whether you want to prevent further hair loss, stimulate hair growth, or just take better care of the hair you have, Keeps will help you select the products you need. Keeps also offers an award-winning, all-natural thickening shampoo and conditioner system, and everything is delivered right to your door. It's affordable, too. Keeps products are about half the cost of those from a traditional pharmacy. Most customers begin noticing results within 6 months of beginning treatment. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/darkseas or click on the link in the description. That's keeps.com/darkseas. The sooner you start using Keeps, the more hair you'll save. USS No-Go. During the Spanish-American War, the United States was determined to conquer the Spanish-occupied Philippine Islands. And on May 1st, 1898, the U.S. Navy infiltrated Manila Bay with relative ease and defeated the Spanish fleet, leading to the capture of the archipelago. U.S. military engineers then analyzed Manila and its coastal defenses, concluding that they were not nearly strong enough. A plan was then set into motion to fortify America's newly acquired colonial outpost in Asia. A decade later, Lieutenant John Kingman of the Army Corps of Engineers came up with a catchy idea, recommending to build a new fort between the islands of Corregidor and Carabao to strengthen the entrance to the bay. Then, on July 18, 1908, Kingman issued a proposal to construct a sturdy blockhouse made entirely of concrete, which would be equipped with a gun platform comprising 2 massive battleship turrets. Starting in 1909, the engineers completely transformed the existing Isle of El Fraile by first leveling the rocky nub to water level. A steel-reinforced concrete structure was then erected in the shape of a battleship, with sharp edges and a defined profile. The fort was 350 feet long and 144 feet wide, rising 44 feet above sea level. Its walls were from 25 to 36 feet thick, and its deck was shielded by a layer of 20-foot reinforced concrete, making it virtually impenetrable. An observation and fire control tower with searchlights and radio antennas rose 60 feet tall, with a sighting mast that resembled World War I battleships and refined the fort's silhouette. As for armament, the faux battleship featured 4 14-inch M1909 guns in 2 armored turrets, especially built for the fort. The top guns could fire 1,660-pound shells with a reach of up to 11 miles, and the fort was also fitted with 4 6-inch guns on each side, plus several mobile anti-aircraft guns. On the inside, Fort Drum housed barracks for the crew and medical facilities, as well as generators, ammunition magazines, a mess hall, and a communications hub. Hence, the building was enabled to operate even if isolated from the main forces. To withstand a lengthy siege, Fort Drum had primary and backup generators, water tanks, and a secure water well. However, these features were never upgraded, and it's said that Fort Drum was over-engineered. During the 1920s and 1930s, the fort became a rare duty station for Army soldiers overseas. Service on the Concrete Battleship meant crewing a gigantic floating fortress that went nowhere, earning the moniker USS No-Go. Still, the immovable Concrete Battleship did not need to go anywhere to prove itself. The fight would soon come to it. An imminent attack. By the late 1930s, it was more than evident that the geopolitical frictions between the US and Japan had irremediably escalated. The Philippines provided a first line of defense against Japanese expansion throughout the Pacific, and as such, demanded that their defenses be strengthened. The garrison at Fort Drum was therefore increased, and enough ammunition and provisions were provided to withstand a siege of up to 6 months. Together with the forces on Corregidor and Carabao, they would be of significant value when the enemy struck. Barely 10 hours after the Japanese assaulted Pearl Harbor, on December 7, 1941, 1,000 Japanese soldiers invaded the Philippines. However, the range of artillery guns at Fort Drum and the other forts surrounding the bay made it impossible for the Imperial Japanese Navy to trespass. With the objective of taking Manila, the country's capital, the invaders landed north and south of the island of Luzon. Shortly after, they would force General Douglas MacArthur and his men to surrender. The attack had taken the Americans by surprise, and the enemy quickly gained air superiority. Still, the US and Filipino troops managed to sustain defensive maneuvers long enough to delay the Japanese advance. Manila Bay was now under heavy attack, and several ships and submarines from the US Asiatic Fleet at Subic Bay were sunk by Japanese air attacks. The Allied troops then retreated to the east and gathered on Corregidor Island, waiting for a Japanese onslaught. However, the enemy ran into an obstacle that would cost them plenty of time and resources. It was Fort Drum, the first American coastal artillery to open fire during World War II. Unsung hero. A garrison of 240 soldiers from the 59th Coastal Artillery Regiment defended the Concrete Battleship with their massive artillery guns. One of the few fortifications across the archipelago with actual protection from aerial attacks, the humble island was of great support to the bay's defense. A month into the invasion, the fort was pummeled with countless 150mm and 240mm shells, which lasted for months. Still, the structure held firm, and the Americans readily returned the fire, lobbing thousands of rounds at the enemy, destroying gun emplacements and inflicting significant casualties. Regardless, the situation in Manila Bay was growing ever more dire for the Americans and Filipinos, and the defense of the Bataan Peninsula was waning every passing day. By early February of 1942, the island batteries at the mouth of Manila Bay were the only strongholds still under American control in the Philippines. Bataan fell on April 10th, and Fort Drum struggled to guard their fellow soldiers stranded on Corregidor. Their mighty guns managed to bring down a colossal barrage despite the thick smoke, and several troop barges were sunk as a consequence. Fort Drum kept firing until Corregidor surrendered, leaving the Concrete Battleship as the last bastion of US resistance in the islands. Still, the fort was never penetrated, resisting over 500 direct hits from Japanese artillery and bombs. And not one crew member was lost during the siege, with only 5 injured. Unfortunately, the lack of maintenance, negligence, and planning before the outbreak of the war left the soldiers without drinking water, and they had no choice but to surrender. Still, before they did, they made sure all their armament was disabled. The official surrender of American forces came at noon on May 6th, as soon as they stopped firing. By then, the magazines were flooded, electrical equipment and small arms were destroyed, and sandbags were fired from the guns, rendering them unusable. The overlooked concrete ship had amazingly resisted until the last moment. Drum D-Day. The loss of the Philippines was one of the worst defeats in the history of the American military. Countless American and Filipino prisoners of war were mistreated in the aftermath, and many didn't make it. Most likely out of retribution for the unmatched success of Fort Drum, those who surrendered and were captured by the Japanese were among those most cruelly brutalized, and it is believed that less than 30 of the original garrison at the fort survived the war. In 1945, the United States sought to regain the archipelago, launching one of the most destructive operations in the entire war. During the capture of Manila, almost the entire city was completely leveled to the ground, and hundreds of thousands of civilians perished. While most of the prior American defenses had been remanned by the Japanese, Fort Drum had been silenced forever, or so the Americans thought. In February, an unscheduled reconnaissance patrol discovered enemy holdouts inside the fortification, apparently survivors from the legendary Musashi, sunk months earlier. The Japanese had occupied the fort after all, but the guns were never returned to operational status. A powerful air assault was then unleashed upon the fort, with bombers releasing a mighty 2,000 bombs on the building. But as the Japanese had found out years before, all these efforts were futile. Despite the heavy rain of fire, only one of the 14-inch main guns broke loose after a direct hit. On April 11th, the USS Phoenix cruiser bombarded the 6-inch gun batteries, but other than rendering them unusable, no further damage was done. The responsibility of recapturing the stronghold was assigned to the 151st Infantry Regiment F Company, with the aid of 113 engineers from B Company, which lent a platoon of demolition men, and a plan was devised by Lieutenant Colonel Fred C. Dyer. At 10 a.m. on April 13th, 2 adapted landing ship mediums called Trojan Horse and Rube Goldberg brought the personnel to El Fraile Island. After securing the fort's deck, the soldiers used pumps and fuel lines to feed a mixture of 2 parts diesel and 1 part gasoline into the structure's air vents. Explosives were then positioned at strategic points, along with 30-minute fuses. The building had been stuffed with 3,000 gallons of the substance in 15 minutes, and the men then swiftly retreated to watch the episode from afar. Suddenly, a fireball burst into the sky and smoke filled the scene, marking the end of the service life of one of history's most resistant fortifications. The fire burned for days, and after the heat dissipated, the Americans went in and found no survivors out of 68 Japanese soldiers. That fateful Friday became known as Drum D-Day, and to this day, the structure remains abandoned, scrapped for valuable metal, and largely intact, with its impressive main guns rusting away, too heavy to be removed. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and leave us a comment below. Also, subscribe to Dark Seas and all our Dark Documentaries channels for more content about the Pacific War. Stay tuned.